Hi, my name is Jeremy Scream and I'm an IronSpeed MVP. In this video, we're going to be talking about using the property sheet on the database tab within an IronSpeed Designer project. As a starting point, I've created a project in IronSpeed Designer version 12, 64-bit. The project was made using the SQL Server 2012 Northwind database. I chose this database over the Southwind sample database that ships with IronSpeed Designer in order to be able to demonstrate one property that is limited to SQL Server 2005 and higher versions. With that said, let's go to the project. Here's our IronSpeed Designer 12 project. To work with the properties of the database, simply click the Databases tab within the IronSpeed Designer environment, and you'll be taken to the Application Explorer and database settings for this project. Within the Application Explorer, the top-level Databases node will provide information from within the IronSpeed online help about all the properties and settings within this Databases tab. It's broken out into different sections: database properties, database table properties, actions properties, data conversion properties, database field definition, foreign key properties, primary key properties, user interface properties, and finally database synchronization properties. IronSpeed's really done a nice job here in version 12, centrally locating all of the properties that you would want to work with in terms of your database. Let's go down to the next node of the tree. The first database and only database we have within this application is the Northwind database on IT4, which is our computer name. It shows us the connection name, the connection string, and the provider name. We wanted to modify the connection string with a user ID or password. We could simply go in here and type in that information. The next level of our tree simply shows us all the tables within our Northwind database that we've added to this application. Clicking that node simply brings us to the same section of online help that we got when we clicked the database node. Within the tables node, we can select any of the tables and view the properties that can be set on a table level basis. First property we see indicates whether the supporting database access code should be generated for the table. If this option is set to null, then the business layer and supporting database access code will not be generated. The next feature, the paging method, specifies the method used to retrieve pages and table controls. As the instructions indicate down here, this is for Microsoft SQL 2005 and above only. If you're using a different database than Microsoft SQL Server or a SQL Server database prior to 2005, this option will be blank and there'll be no choices to be made here. The Allow, Insert, Update, and Delete property indicates whether database record updates are permitted. This is a good feature to have if you're using third-party databases where you just want to retrieve the data, but you don't want to allow any changes into a third-party database. The default pages folder specifies the application folder location for newly created pages and underlying code files. So in our instance, for our categories table, the application folder will create entries within the categories folder, which we can see from the layout editor. Our categories folder, if we were to create new entries based on the categories table, they would reside under our categories folder. The next option, the default quick selector file name, specifies the default file name for the quick selectors for this table or view on an application-wide basis. You can override this at the page level on specific quick selector controls, but this sets the default for the application. this next property, the default menu specifies the main menu name for newly created pages for this table. Again, similar to the default page folder, if we go over here, go to our menu options, by specifying that any options we create for the categories table default to the categories menu, those will automatically be added under the categories menu option here. And the last property, the table name alias, is used to generate class names and other elements in generated code, and is also used in formulas to reference this table. Now on to the good stuff. The final node within the tree for the properties of the database tab, within each table you'll see the fields within that table. Clicking on a field reveals the properties that can be set on a field-by-field basis. In this instance, I've chosen the category ID field, which is the primary key for this table. Selecting the next field, category name, reveals the properties that can be set for the category name field. Default value specifies the default value for this field. If it's disabled, simply click on the ellipsis, enable it, and then within here you can set a string or different functions or operators that would allow you to set a default value for that field. Similarly, initialize when inserting record. Whenever a record is added in the back end, whatever value is set here will be set as the value for that field. Initialize when reading a record specifies a formula that sets this field to a specific value when a record is retrieved from the database. And initializing when updating the field specifies a formula that initializes this field to a specific value when the record is updated in the database. The label text specifies the text to display in the user interface label controls corresponding to this field. This here is the only property by default that isn't disabled in this top action section. We can click on the ellipsis and change this label to anything we want, and on an application-wide basis, all of our category fields will have a label of whatever we specify here. Under the data conversion section of the property sheet, the case conversion property indicates how to process text entered into the field. Here we can specify that text is entered in lowercase, uppercase, or proper capitalize all word cases. Storage format is typically for numbers and dates, and in this case we're on a string, so this field is disabled. The trim spaces property indicates whether to trim leading and trailing spaces on data entered into the field. The database field section shows properties that are controlled at the database level set within, in our instance, the SQL Server 2012 database. We specified in the database that this field is not case sensitive. It uses this particular database collation, etc., etc. If this field were a foreign key, which in this case it is not, we could create a virtual foreign key, which we'll do in a different table. Primary key section, again, is only applicable to the primary key field, and there's really nothing we can change there. And the last section, the user interface. The display format, typically for numbers and dates, isn't applicable on this field. Exclude from page is a nice feature that allows you on an application-wide basis to exclude this field from any newly created page. And that works great when you're working with audit trail fields, and you may have other uses for such behavior. But whether you want to exclude this from the future pages, simply specify yes, no, or leave it as the default. Permitted values, you could specify a list here within single quotes, comma delimited, if you wanted to limit this field to a set of values. The required property, if this is set to yes and a user tries to save a page where this field is on and no value is specified for this field, they will get an error indicating that the field is required. Text box column specifies the maximum number of characters that can be entered or displayed into a text box control, and the validation type, different options that are built into IronSpeed. If you wanted this to be a country, a credit card expiration date, a credit card number, currency, date, email address, file, latitude, longitude, number, password, percentage, string, US phone, state, and zip or URL. If you specify one of these, IronSpeed will validate what the user inputs, and if it doesn't match the validation type rules, it'll throw an error whenever this information is saved to the database. The last thing I wanted to show on the tables section, under the order details, we have a couple of foreign keys. We have a foreign key to the order table and a foreign key to the product table. IronSpeed has determined that this foreign key relationship is defined in the database, and that this product ID within the order details table is related to the products.productID field. Within the virtual foreign key, we could specify a relationship to a foreign key not defined in the database, but we could make one within the IronSpeed Designer environment. In this case, we don't need to do that. However, when working with foreign keys, this display as property allows you to specify how you want to display the foreign key. In this case, we have access to all of the fields within the product table. So we could say that whenever we display a product ID within the order details table, we want to show the product name plus possibly the unit price. Now, on an application-wide basis, anytime we're on the order details table and we're showing a foreign key to a product, that will be displayed as the product name space product unit price. Within the database properties tab, we also have views that exist in our database that may or may not be included in our application. In this case, since all of these views are grayed out, I can tell that when I built the application, I decided not to build the add, edit, and show pages for these particular tables. If you did want to use any of these views within the application and not have data entry screens, simply changing the include in application to yes will then build the supporting database access code for each view. The rest of the properties are similar to the table properties for views. In my workings with the IronSpeed Designer in views, most of the information that I've changed is to include in application, and whenever you do that, typically, and then you set a virtual primary key, IronSpeed will change the allow, insert, update, and delete on that view to yes. So I typically go back and change that to no. So now I've created the database access code for the alphabetical list of products view, gave it a virtual primary key of product ID, and then within here we can specify that category ID is a virtual primary key, and it's going to point to categories category ID. By making that association, we can then change the display as for the category ID for this view to show the category name. And that's mostly what you'll do with the views within your IronSpeed application. Hope you've enjoyed this video on using the property sheet on the database tab within an IronSpeed Designer project. For more information on IronSpeed, visit ironspeed.com. There you'll find a wealth of information within the help files, the user forums, and many of the other articles and videos contained within the site. Thank you for watching.